about today. So do I really have any authority to talk about this topic? Well, I've been doing this for about 3 or 4 years. We've done implementations. We've implemented IoT and wearables with customers. We've sold wearables. But I guess the qualifier I have is that what I'm going to share with you today is simply my own experiences, okay? So some of these may apply to you, others may not. But the purpose of my talk today, and the reason that Charlie asked me to speak, is because I want to share with you the really practical reality of IoT. Let's strip back all the hype and let's talk about what really can happen. IoT. So myth number 1, IoT is mainstream. I don't agree with that. I don't think IoT is mainstream. In fact, here you can see a shot of the Wink implementation at the Home Depot here in the United States, and you can see the devices that are being sold. Is this where average Americans are going to implement IoT? This is all about DIY. It's all about people who are deep into technology. It's technologists. It's the kind of people who are shopping at Radio Shack, who love to spend 4 or 5 hours implementing products, making sure the hub works, trying to find out, how to optimize their home, spending 2 or 3 hours to send, oh, by the way, I got an alert on my phone when the window opened. So I've done this before. I spent 4 or 5 hours. There's only a very, very small group of people who really want to spend an afternoon doing this. IoT is not mainstream. Myth number 2, standards have been established. Absolutely nonsense. We are still in a massive state of flux. There's all kinds of different competing standards that are going on right now. There's rumors about Apple, and you have Google with their own standards, you have the Open Interconnect, which includes a variety of companies like Intel, Samsung, Broadcom. You have the All Seen Alliance, for those of you that might have attended Mobile World Congress, you saw about the hype and the different types of programs they were putting on. So there's a massive amount of confusion around now in terms of coming to any kind of formalized standard about where IoT should land. Myth number 3, let's automate everything. Actually, I can tell you from experience, there's a whole bunch of things you shouldn't automate. There are things that we do, that humans do really well. We make coffee really well. And yet there's a lot of people who are tackling problems like this and saying, I'm going to automate coffee making. Well, really? Is that really a good use of time? Is there something that's more efficient than the human hand to be able to take a coffee pot, pour the water in? How beneficial is it to wake up in the morning at 6:05 and have a pot of coffee there, as opposed to making it yourself? Is that where you want to spend time, money, resources? As I talk about these myths and I talk about truths, I'm really talking to the entrepreneurs in the audience, the people who want to build companies. So truth number 1, this is one thing I've learned. There are only 2 things that consumers really want IoT for. This is what I've observed over the last 3 years implementing this. Only 2 things. And the first one is safety. People are very concerned about safety. They want to make sure their homes are secure. They love to have video. They want to be able to make sure their doors are locked. This is actually, when you think about consumer IoT, this is one area where the consumer is willing to reach into their pocket, bring out their wallet, and pay. Because they want to be more secure in their homes, and they want to feel safe, and they're willing to invest money there. Forget the coffee making. No one's going to spend an extra $300 to have an automated coffee. Would I spend $1,000 to make sure that my family's safe? Would I spend another $100 a month to make sure that every window in the house is secure and that I have a video feed to my phone? Yeah, I might. So what do you think the second thing is? If the first one's safety, what do you think the second thing that people will pay money for when it comes to IoT?
Convenience.
What? Convenience. Good guess, but I don't agree with that. Savings. Everyone wants to save money. If there's a way that you can implement IoT to save you money, guess what? I'm going to pay for that. And we've done implementations there, where we've used IoT to save people money in electricity, so that the air conditions turn off and on at the right times before I arrive home. Lights are automatically turned off when I leave the home, so that my electricity bill goes down. Those are the only two things in consumer IoT where I've actually seen consumers willing to spend money. So when we talk about Wink and we've seen the implementation at the IoT, that is the 0.1%. That's the fringe. Those are the geeks, the DIY people, right, who love the contraptions. But when it comes to implementation in IoT, focus on those two things. Truth number 3. Venture funding is allowing us to automate things we should not. How many of you know about great IoT companies that are being funded? There's actually a company that's funded with an IoT toothbrush. Really? It's actually more problematic for me to make sure that the battery power there, and I can check, do I really need to know how many brush strokes I'm doing? So if those of the people in the audience who are thinking about innovations, be careful, don't fall into the trap. Just because a venture fund wants to fund it, it doesn't mean it's a good use of your time. And we can delude ourselves and think that the consumers actually desperately need to have an automated IoT toothbrush. But I would venture to say they don't. However, there are some products that are actually very useful. And there are some products in IoT that actually can save lives. So here's an example of a device on cars that will wake you up in the instance that you fall asleep. Give you an alert. Right? So this device can actually recognize from your pupils and your eyes if you're falling asleep, it'll send a buzz. There's also some that come with in the back of the ear. So would you spend $200 for this? So that your teenager has this in their car? Maybe. So it's not all useless. And again, this comes back to safety. I might be willing to spend it. It's actually quite useful. Truth number 5. IoT is not a product, it's a service. I think this is probably the most important slide that I'll present today. People think IoT is a product. They think it's a device. Oh, it's something I can put in my pocket, it's something I buy. This is one thing I've learned the hard way. Purchasing the product, making the product is the easy part. IoT is a very, very complex service to manage. So here's an example of an implementation in the hospitality business where you would use IoT to do a variety of different things. Turn on the lights, potentially manage the temperature of the room, make sure that someone can enter the room with a key card, send information to the television. Those are all things you can buy. You can buy those devices, and in many cases, some of those devices now, you can get for under $20 on Alibaba now, you can get devices that will turn your air conditioner on and off and stuff like that. That's not the problem. The device is not the problem. The challenge that we have faced in the past is managing that. Think about this. Think about implementing this in a hotel with 100 rooms. Now think about managing all the complexity of different customers coming into the hotel, lights being turned on, being turned off, different soap programs, different settings, different personalizations. Oh, I don't like the lights here, I don't like the lights there. What happens when the battery goes? Who's going to implement this? Someone's going to rush up there and make sure that the battery is implemented so someone can get into their room? Who's going to manage all the savings? What happens if it goes wrong and the lights go on at 2 in the morning? We've had that situation happen before too. So it is the real effort of those people who are thinking about going into the IoT space is, my suggestion is, push all your resources into the service part of the business. That's what you should be focusing on. That means building operations, building service management, building customer care, building customer success. Don't worry about the product side. There's a lot of people, you can get a lot of cheap products on the market now. There's a lot of different kinds of ways of getting the of choices you have. But at the service side, very, very difficult to implement. And I think people make a mistake here. This is why companies fail. Automation can go horribly wrong. Automation is dangerous in certain instances. And if it's not managed properly and it's not managed appropriately like a service, things can go terribly wrong. People think, oh, it's no human, I'm taking all the human error out, I'm taking the human touch out of it, right? Well, it can happen on many different ways. What happens, for example, if you have we have automated locks right now. But what happens, for example, when the internet goes down? What are the protocols when you're in your home, or you're in your hotel suite, and all of a sudden the internet goes down, and all your customers can't get into their room? Right? What happens there? All these different scenarios have to be managed, have to be thought through, and have to have fallbacks and reliable protocols for managing these different kinds of risks. In my humble opinion, if I was about to start a business in the IoT space, I'd be focusing on B2B. Because I think B2B offers a lot more opportunities than the B2C market. So as you think about industries, for those people who are starting businesses, think about how IoT can help industries with specific problems. Okay? So for example, one of the industries that we spend a lot of time on is retail. How can IoT help in retail? How can I optimize the efficiency, the management of my inventory? How can I make sure that the security protocols, when customers leave, that there's not instances of theft, right? How can I know my customer as soon as they arrive into there? How can I make sure their personalized experience when they come into my store is that my customers and the sales staff are completely aware of who that customer is and how they should be best served? These are the kind of problems that, you can pick any industry, but these are the kind of problems and the kind of things that I think entrepreneurs should be focusing on when they think about IoT. So in summary, if someone said, hey, this is the IoT checklist for success. Focus on B2B. Entrepreneurs, solve a key problem. Don't automate just because you can. A lot of people get into that kind of problem. Just because I can do it, I'll go ahead and do it. Safety and savings are two great areas to start with. And of course, IoT is not a product, it's a service. Right? And that means that resources and allocation and money and technical expertise have to be dedicated to that. And finally, focus on an industry that you care about. For those people who are thinking about getting into IoT space, focus on an industry that you have in-depth knowledge on, right? Because you're competing with those people who have been in that industry for 20 years. So if you don't have an experience in healthcare, then don't try to solve healthcare problems in the IoT space. Or at least build your management team to support that. So let's talk a little bit about wearables too. Charlie asked me to talk about two topics. So as you know, I've been doing a lot of Samsung and my prior company Disney has we've done a lot of implementations of wearables, so there's been some learnings that have happened as a result of this, and again you'll start noticing some similar patterns between wearables and IoT. So myth number one, wearables are all about watches. People think actually that when they think about wearables, they think, oh well, it's all about watches. It's actually not. I think watches are just the tip of the iceberg. In fact, I would argue that in many cases, the wrist is probably one of the most ineffective areas that you should be thinking about wearables. What does a wearable mean? It means wearing some device on your body, right, that's going to either transmit information or collect information or data. But the wrist is really ineffective. Actually, when you talk to medical experts or healthcare experts, there's many other places on the body that are far more effective to be capturing data than on your wrist. And in other industries like sports, again, sometimes the wrist is the least effective place. In fact, if you're doing counting steps, you guys are aware that you're going to get a much higher accurate step count if you use a belt clip than if you do with a wrist. This is really, actually this is a very inaccurate measure for counting steps. And there have been many instances of people who do a lot of shopping, for example. In America, we love to shop at Target, right? But people push the cart like this, right? So they're pushing the cart, they could be walking a kilometer, right? But is the wrist moving? So the risk is really the wearables. Don't make the mistake to think about wearables as watches, right? That's just the first place that the companies decide to put them, but it's actually not the best place. Wearables collect accurate information. They don't. And for those of you that have, how many of you, I probably had about 3 or 4 wearables, but those of you who had it, have you ever done, those of you who are runners, have you ever done a GPS track and seen how the variance is? It can vary by 30 or 40%, right? It often doesn't really track your heartbeat very well, or your steps, or your distance. So we're very early stages in accuracy. And I think that's why a lot of consumers are starting to lose a little bit of confidence. Because they're saying, wait, I'm not sure if this is, and once the consumer loses confidence and say, well, I'm not sure it really works. What if you, let me ask you this, what if your watch was plus or minus 30%? He's like, yeah, you know, it's like I think it's between 2 and 245, somewhere in there. Like, what's your threshold for accuracy there? You're like, nah, it's got to be to the minute. So why are we so forgiving when it comes to even more important stuff like our heart rate? Yeah, it's kind of right. You know, I think I did like a kilometer. You know? We're at the very, very early stages. Myth number 3, consumers can't live without wearables because we hear so much hype about it. So look at the survey over here. According to our survey among the general population, a strong percentage of people do not think they'll actually use these products. And that's actually pretty substantive. It's a pretty substantive number. Smartwatch, 36, a third of people say I'm not going to use a smartwatch. Fitness band, 36%. 40% said smart clothing, no, not going to do it. So I think, I'm trying to put the reality here. When people get excited about wearables, I'm telling you from my experience, I faced a much different reality when it actually practically implementing it. And there's still a lot of resistance, a lot of hesitation, a lot of nervousness, a lot of, I don't really care about wearables. So let's talk about some truths. Well, one truth is that there's a whole bunch of companies doing wearables. In fact, there's more, if you look today, there's hundreds of companies. Everyone has a watch, right? Everyone's got a wearable today. Actually, this is an area that really doesn't get a lot of press, but it's actually really quite exciting. They're now putting conductive materials, weaving that into the fabric. So you can actually have a far more accurate data collection tool than you can with your wrist. And this can be connected to heart rate. It can be connected to steps more accurately. It's a far better conductor of information. Truth number 3, I've seen it myself, screens are now bendable. So they're starting to create new and interesting technologies where screens and information can be contoured to the body, can be implemented better in a wearable environment. Another very important point, I want to reinforce this, is that wearables are actually data collection devices. People think that wearables are great productivity tools, or they're things that they can enter information. I haven't really seen that. The tablet, the device, the mobile phone is actually a far better tool for entering information. But what a wearable is really good at is collecting information. And I think that, again, from entrepreneurs in the audience, as you start thinking about how you want to participate in the wearables, focus on this. Focus on how can I implement and how can I collect data and why is that data useful? Because there's so many different implementations of it. So with data, assuming you made the first step, like, okay, I really want to invest in wearables and I want to be collecting data, this is where the big opportunity lies, in my opinion. It lies in what can we do with that data, because the iceberg underneath the water is where it gets exciting. And that's how am I going to use that data? What industries can be effective, can be implemented, can result in savings in order to, as a result of collecting this data. So I would look to the healthcare industry for inspiration. I think we've just scratched the surface here. There are many different kinds of implementations of potential solutions in hospitals, healthcare, doctors' offices, where IoT can be really useful. One such example, which I've heard quoted before, is there's actually a wearable now where a doctor will be notified prior to going into surgery whether or not his hands have been properly cleansed. I forget the statistics, but thousands of people die every year because of lack of hygiene and cleanliness as they're moving into an exam or they're moving into a surgery. So what can be done to make sure that doesn't happen? And if I were able to equip every one of the doctors who are surgeons and saying, hey, by the way, with a $300 device, I can make sure that doesn't happen, that might be useful. It might be time well spent. Another area, manufacturing. Those of you who've followed companies like Bosch, right, and seen some of the advancements that have been happening with Airbus and Boeing, have seen how people have been able to use goggles and glasses to be able to better assemble and better manufacture on site, right? When you're dealing with 10,000 different kinds of tools that you're using to put together instruments or to assemble different kinds of an aircraft, how can glasses and wearables help you identify what pieces to put together, what the torque should be, how tightly that screw should be done? So great savings here. Truth 8, wearables will impact sports. I just wanted to get this in there because I do think it's a fun topic. There's a lot of things that are happening in sports. I don't know how many of you, anybody tried this Babolat racket? Anybody? No? Okay. So as a tennis fan, I've tried that. And it's really amazing. They actually put inside the handle of the racket, they have now very, very accurate sensors. They can tell you the speed of the racket, they can tell you how you're hitting it, they can tell you whether you're hitting with top spin. Prior to this, this was all feel, it was all touch. But now for the first time, wearables and those types of things are actually being implemented in sports. Same thing with concussions. There's been a lot of recent talk about that right now. Now they're putting sensors into the helmet. So if in American football, if someone does have a collision and there's a head impact, they can actually transmit that to the team physician, and the team physician can then make a decision in real time. I need to pull that player off the field right now because they're actually suffering from a head injury, from a concussion. Very exciting area. So the checklist for success of those people going into the wearables business looks very similar, right? My suggestions: focus on B2B. Ask yourself what data would be useful to whom. So if I'm collecting all this information, who would be interested in that data? How can I monetize that data? Solve a key problem. Again, safety and savings. Same two themes I've seen again and again. Wearables is not a service, or it is a service, it's not a product. Think about that. Well, what are the service implications of implementing that tool? And then naturally migrate to the industry that you have the most experience in. So that's it. That's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.